Good morning and welcome to this webinar. We apologize for the difficulties that we had in starting a bit late. We can blame the technology, but you're all welcome to this third in our series of DBA webinars at Regent Business School. My name is Osman Sidat and I'm the Deputy Dean at Regent Business School. Today also marks the official launch of the Doctor of Business Administration program at Regent Business School, a program of which we are very proud of having received full accreditation for. Thank you once again for making the time, and my apologies again for the delay in starting the webinar. A special welcome to our distinguished panel this morning, who will be introduced by our academic dean, Dr. Blom. And our webinar today is entitled The Future Focus Research for Impact, Growing Leaders for Social Change. And we'll in particular be examining again the role of DBA research and its relevance. Just for some housekeeping in terms of, you are reminded that you can use the chat function to communicate with other participants and air your views. You're also able to use the Q&A function if you have any questions directed towards the panelists. And we will obviously endeavor to respond to all questions. Thank you again for your participation. And I would have pleasure now in handing over to Dr. Blom.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks, Prof. Sidat, as always, for getting us started. My name is Ronel Blom. I'm the Dean of Academics at the Regent Business School. And a great welcome to all of you. I see Dr. Bawa, Professor Bawa has also joined us. So welcome to our final webinar in the series, where we intend to explore a fresh, unique, and meaningful identity for the Regent Business School. Doctorate of Business Administration. So I just wanted to give some context in terms of the previous webinars that we've already run. For those of you who could not join us for the first two webinars, the gist was as follows. In the first webinar, we asked, what should we do differently? And that resulted in an interesting discussion about new and innovating methodologies that we may apply and employ in undertaking research for the Doctorate of Business Administration. In the second webinar, we asked, what should we be researching? And I think there was a resounding agreement that we should be looking at that intersection between the social and the economic, and the extent to which the DBA can contribute towards understanding that. In this webinar, we cast our eyes firmly on the future and ask, given our socio-economic context, what is the future we need? And then, how can the Regent Business School Doctorate contribute in defining and describing this new future? So to help us explore these questions, we have two eminent guests, and thank you very much for both of you making yourself available to us. Our first guest is Professor Ahmed Bawa. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the University of South Africa and is an accomplished academic, and more importantly, someone who holds dear the ideals of higher education in the country, in the region, and in the continent. Welcome, Prof. Bawa. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Let me also at the same time introduce our second guest so that there's no interruption in between. Dr. Ahmed Sheikh. Dr. Sheikh is the Managing Director of Regent Business School, and it is his vision that brought us here today. As a member and Deputy President of the South African Business School Association, he has pushed for innovation in the sector. In his capacity as the Research Advisor to the Minister of Trade and Industry, he has become keenly aware of the socio-economic issues facing our contemporary society. Welcome, Dr. Sheikh. And welcome to all of you. And
thank you,
Thank you, Dr. Said. Thank you very much. All what's left for me to do really is to hand over to Prof. Bawa, who I know I have been rushed off his feet. So thank you very much. Prof. Bawa, I have your presentation. So when you say share screen, I will do that. Okay?
Sure. First of all, let me say thank you to Regent Business School and yourself, Dr. Blom, for bringing me into the discussion. And I'd like to also say very much that I appreciate this opportunity of being at a momentous occasion. It's kind of the launch of the DBA. I think that one of the things that I hope that we would have some time to discuss a little later on is the importance of us, first of all, finding ways of getting the public higher education and private higher education sectors to work much more effectively with each other. And then secondly, it's just this idea that we would be, it would be really important for us to also have a discussion about kind of the nature of higher education in terms of its relationship to society, and perhaps more importantly, just how it all fits together to bring maximum benefit to society. And then thirdly, I think perhaps most importantly, it's this issue of differentiation. And it's this idea that actually, you know, not all parts of the higher education system are going to do exactly the same thing. That, you know, there might well be things that bind us all together, but there might well be things which differentiate different parts of the system from each other. So I think that, hopefully when we have some time to discuss, those would be important issues to discuss. Please begin the slide share then.
Please tell me if you can see it.
If you could put it on slideshow mode, it would be.
Yeah, I'll do that. Doesn't want to do it. Oh, there you are. Okay. I will manipulate it for you. So you just need to say next slide. Okay.
So thank you for that. So first of all, I mean, when I read the documents that were sent to me, or at least the blurbs and so on, it was quite clear to me that considerable thought had been given to designing this particular DBA. And I think that that's hugely important because, generally speaking, DBAs are DBAs. There might be some small levels of differentiation and so on. But it seems to me, at least, that we have taken this opportunity, you have taken this opportunity to really give some serious consideration of what this DBA, how this DBA might be differentiated from other ones, focusing in on things like research for impact and so on. And I'll come back to that in a minute. For me, at least, there were two major issues that come through the documentation that was sent to me. And I think that these are two issues that have to be addressed, not just by the, not just by the design of the DBA, but should really permeate throughout all of our higher education now. The one is this idea of shifting from kind of reductionist approaches to integrated approaches. And then secondly, trying to understand with a lot of efficiency and efficacy how to interweave theory and praxis. And the fact of the matter is that what we've done over the years in South Africa in particular, but in other parts of the world too, is we've kind of completely separated out the kind of the learning in the theoretical domain from learning in the practical domain or in the praxis domain. And this has really damaged, I think, has damaged higher education in many respects. And it seems to me that there's a definite need for us to begin to think about integrating, interweaving that learning to a much greater extent that is currently available to students. There's another side to this, and it really is what has informed our skills development terrain. And that is that we've kind of completely separated out what we think of as cognitive learning from skills-based learning. And that's a really ridiculous kind of bifurcation that occurs. So we say that skills training happens in this sector, cognitive learning happens in that sector, and it's a very, very dangerous conceptualization that we've produced in South Africa to address this issue. And and I think that just one way of thinking about this is, I'm a theoretical physicist. And clearly there's a lot of cognitive work going on, and I kind of design models of the universe, and I try to understand, what kinds of models will best describe the universe. But ultimately, I have to also develop skills to translate those cognitive ideas or that cognitive process into numbers that can be tested in a laboratory, right? So there's an ongoing engagement between cognition and skills building. And by the way, there's a tremendous amount of feeding off each other, if you like, as we head into one and the other. So I think that we have to think very hard about this issue of skills development, even at the doctoral level. I know that sounds a bit ridiculous, but I think it's important, yes. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So I've recognized, in fact, that there's a lot of thought that has been given, and and of course the the blurbs say that it kind of plans to be disruptive, which is great. It recognizes all the disruptions, which is great, beginning with COVID-19. It engages in research that leads to impact. That's very important, and I think that I think all the universities now, all higher education institutions are beginning to engage with this in a more deliberate way. And of course, it engages in uncomfortable truths. That's important. The question is, what do these mean, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you have to get beyond the slogans, it seems to me, and to begin to kind of really unpack what this means in terms of research and so on. So let's go on to the next slide, please. So I think one of the things that we just have to remember is just what happened in between 2015 and 2017. And of course, it was a tremendously disruptive period. And we just have to remind ourselves, what did we learn from that period? And I think that what we did learn was kind of this, that the purpose of universities as social institutions has really been brought into question. And that has really kind of shaken, if you like, at least the public higher education systems to come to grips with what is their purpose in society as social institutions. The second question is, who owns the universities? I mean, I had a frightening experience in October 2016, I was sitting here in the office and the phone was just ringing. There were about 18 universities that had already shut down. The other 8 were all teetering on the brink of shutting down. And the thing that really shocked me was that there was absolutely no defense of the university system, not from the public, not from the government, not from the private sector, not from students, not from communities. There was just no defense, the universities. So the question is, who owns the universities? Who owns the higher education system in South Africa? And clearly this is different, of course, for public institutions and private institutions, but it's still a question that I think that has to be probed in the private sector. And the big question for me is, what are the publics of the universities and the higher education systems and institutions, and what is their relationship with these publics? So clearly when one is dealing with a DBA, there's a whole range of publics that come into play. And the question is, what is the role of the publics, of those publics in shaping the institution, shaping the nature of the programs those institutions offer, and so on. And then finally, just to say over here, that what I think has happened over the last, over the last 25 years is that we've seen a catastrophic breakdown of a social compact that came with the National Commission on Higher Education, which kind of served us well for about 15 years or 20 years, but has really now broken down, and that there's a need for a new conceptual framework, if you like, relating to the relationship between higher education and society. Let's go to the next slide. So Kenneth Rogoff is a Harvard economist, you know? And I'm not going to read this whole thing, but essentially what he said is that, isn't it nice to see how universities and higher education have disrupted other industries, you know, like kind of the motor industry or space, or, you know, space exploration, or advanced manufacturing, or whatever. You know, universities have been central to those. He said, wouldn't it be nice if universities disrupted themselves? So it's a really important question, it seems to me, that we have to pose, and we have to keep asking ourselves about that. Okay, let's go on. Thank you. So, you know, I always like to start from where we are. You know, what do we see around us? You know, because in a sense, you know, that's the reality. That's the kind of objective conditions in which we are based, if you like. You know, just so we have a stagnant economy. In fact, it's no longer stagnant. It's now sort of we're in a state of contraction because of COVID-19. 30% unemployment. We have violent poverty, growing inequality, global warming, and unbridled consumption. Those two go together. We have the erosion of democracy and a slide towards anti-intellectualism. We have the degradation of ethical society, which is so prevalent. And I just saw a note a little earlier on in the chat box that many people are watching the Zondo Commission like today. Escalation of political violence and the all around the world, you know, just we are seeing this. And by the way, we see it in South Africa too. And the construction of the other, you know, just the xenophobia, ethnic tensions that are popping up all around the world and so on. We see massive global migrations, and people don't migrate unless they have to migrate. Then there's rapid changes in the world of work, and then and of course what we've discovered now, these public health challenges that we face. By the way, the whole issue around the rapid changes in the world of work is tied, of course, to this new technology moment that we are in. The important thing for us to remember is that these are simultaneously intensely local and intensely global, you know, and universities and higher education sit, you know, in this kind of nexus, if you like, between the global knowledge system and the local knowledge system, and they are like tightly bound with each other, if you like. Thank you. Let's go on to the next one. So, you know, what are the disruptions there that are before us? Now, COVID-19 is a disruption, of course. I mean, it's disrupted life tremendously. But actually, COVID-19, you know, one can think of it at least as having pre-existed the arrival of the virus. You know, all the conditions that gave rise to the chaos that it caused around the world were already there. You know, and in South Africa, of course, when we entered that first lockdown, within a day, like everybody realized that this is going to be a totally unsustainable kind of you know, action to take. That I'm talking about the lockdown, and of course, what that meant really was that all the conditions that COVID-19 gave rise to actually pre-existed the arrival of the virus. So it is a disruption, but it's not the kind of disruption that you know, one would think of as disrupting kind of you know, disrupting the nature of the economy or disrupting the nature of society in the, you know, in the long term, if you like. The new technology moment clearly is a disruptive moment for us. It really is kind of a moment that where we're seeing this integration of different new technologies. I know some people refer to the fourth industrial revolution and third industrial revolution and so on. You know, I don't buy into all of that jargon, like, but we are definitely sitting at a new technology moment, if you like, where there's a tremendous amount of kind of integration and so on taking place. We must be careful not to underplay the decolonial turn. we have to be aware that there's a global movement for the movement towards decolonization. So, and this is something which is deeply tied, of course, to the issues around Black Lives Matter, around the Me Too movement, and so on. I mean, there's a whole range of really important social movements underway at the moment, which are hugely going to shape the way in which we think about business and everything else in the future. The advances that are made in advanced materials are just staggering. You know, everything from nanoparticles to intelligent materials and so on. And we are beginning to see the big advances that are made there. Advanced manufacturing is another one. Additive manufacturing is one small part of that, but robotics and everything else like that come into play in advanced manufacturing, virtual reality and so on, deeply shaping the future. And then, of course, there are these vast transformations that are taking place in the workplace. Just one simple one. That is that the working week in a place like Holland now is something like 32 hours, and decreasing. Same in Denmark, and so on. And I think what COVID-19 has shown us is that the idea of the traditional workplace is come and gone. I mean, it's not going to be with us for much longer. And these two, of course, are simultaneously intensely local and global. Let's go on. And I'm not going to go through these, but just to say that in terms of that new technology moment, we're seeing autonomous cars, aeroplanes, trains, data warehousing, data analytics are now part of our daily jargon. Artificial intelligence is kind of completely interwoven into a range of technologies that we already use. Population genomics and gene-based medical treatments are upon us, and we're just seeing the discovery of these new vaccines. Those have used tremendous new technologies, and they are kind of really going to drive this new edge, it seems to me. I won't go on with the others, but these are all things that we have to keep in mind. I'll share the presentation with you. Thanks. Please, let's go on. And of course, there are also major shifts in the global landscape. Vast shifts in the geopolitics and global economics. I mean, just over the last few years, we've just seen massive shifts from what was there before. Just the rise of China is something we can't avoid. We have to grapple with that, and so on. The geopolitics of knowledge is something which is very real. I mean, just a few years ago, if you asked us, where's the center of gravity of the world's knowledge production, we would have said it's somewhere in the North Mid-Atlantic. Well, it's no longer there. It's shifted decisively to the east, and so on. By the way, by 2030, Africa will have 20% of the world's population. What does that mean, for us? And by the way, by 2050, that percentage will be 45% of the world's population. Then, of course, I've mentioned before the impact of the new technological moment, the slide towards anti-intellectualism and its paraphernalia. Having a person like Donald Trump in the presidency of the USA has really given us a slide towards anti-intellectualism, and of course, global warming and mass consumption I've mentioned already. And I think the question Regent Business School will have to ask is, what are the implications of these for the DBA? Because you have to kind of really build them in. I'm not going to spend much time on this because we are all academics. We have to ask ourselves, what are the purposes of all higher education? Clearly, it's creating active citizens and all of that. And it doesn't matter what level we are thinking about, whether it's a undergraduate certificate or whether it's a PhD or doctorate, we have to think about these things. We have to think about critical thinking, systemic thinking, and so on, that we have to build into our curricula. And they have to be brought in a systematic way, it seems to me. Thank you. Let's go on. And then, of course, there's the ethics of the kind of this new technology moment that we are in. So And what I wanted to say here was that we have to be completely clear about the fact that that we, that we are in a particular moment in time. There are huge dangers that are that come out of these disruptive technologies and their implications for society more generally, but also for the business community and for the higher education institutions and so on. And what we can't do is wait for disastrous outcomes, if you like, and we have to think about what the implications for pedagogy are. So in other words, saying that when you are constructing thoughts about, when you're constructing the DBA, these have to become part of the general the general kind of thinking, if you like, as the DBA is constructed. So let me just summarize by making 3 or 4 points before I say thank you. Just summarize 3 or 4 points. The first one is that in shaping a program like the one that you have suggested, it seems to me that you really have to think about deep-seated partnerships. That it's not possible for an institution of higher education to design a DBA by itself, because it really does depend on a thorough understanding of what the key kind of driving motivations for the transformation of business and for the reconceptualization of business. When I say business, I don't mean business in a narrow sense. I mean also sort of engagement in social development and so on. Those are all very complex, and it seems to me that higher education institutions can't design programs of this nature by themselves. Of course, when one thinks about theoretical particle physics, which is what I do, it wouldn't make much sense for me to have a conversation with with the business community, for example. But if you are designing a disruptive DBA, you can't do this by yourselves. It has to be done in partnership with other players in society, it seems to me. And by the way, I think that the one area that you should not undermine, if you like, is just really bringing in significant kind of inputs from from the business sector clearly, but from the service sector, from the world of the science councils to the world of government, especially municipal government, and then of course the NGO sector and so on, because it's there in that service sector where the big kind of challenges occur in terms of managing this very critical time we face. The second thing is that it means that there has to be a deep consideration given to how you bring about a much stronger linkages between the world of practice and the world of theory. The theory-praxis nexus is absolutely critical. You're not going to solve these big problems, if you like, by sitting in front of your computer and doing it, reading journal articles. Those are critically important, of course, but they're not going to be the way that this is solved. I mean, this will really require in-depth engagement and so on. The third point is that there has to be an engagement with the existing disruptive forces that are taking place in society, and we've spoken about them. But to really engage them, to have a really good idea of what's emerging from them and what they will lead to. The fourth one is the issue of contextualization. Just those, what do we see around us, and really coming to grips with understanding that that any program of learning in South Africa has to take into account those 4 or 5, those 5 or 6 important contextual elements. And my last point is that that, in shaping a DBA of this nature, which is really, I think, a huge step forward, in shaping a DBA of this nature, that we begin to think about genuine integration instead of reductionism. It would be a very dangerous thing for your graduates not to have a really good handle on science and the interactions between science and the humanities, because so much of these new technologies are driven by a kind of scientific principles and so on. So if you don't have a good sense, and if you don't have a high-level science literacy, it will be very hard to understand the impact of these technologies and so on. So the science humanities kind of interface, coming into bringing all of that into the world of the DBA, if you like, would be very important. A high-level numeracy would be a high-level technological literacy. All of those have to be brought in, it seems to me. With that, let me say thank you so much, and I hope that was useful to you.
Unmute.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Prof. That was incredibly useful. And I think we're pretty aligned. I'm going to leave that to Dr. Sheikh to explore further, but I get the sense that we're quite aligned in our thinking in terms of what we want to achieve here. So I'm going to unshare. Prof. Sidat, are there lots of questions or can we move on?
Sorry. No, we can move on, Dr. Blom.
Okay. All right, then in that case, Dr. Sheikh, I would like to give you the floor. Thank you very much for joining us. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Blom. Thank you very much to Professor Bawa as well. I think you're right, Dr. Blom. We are almost completely aligned with the thought processes, and we sit in such different contexts, if you like, institutionally, and it's really refreshing to sort of observe the alignment. So thanks very much, Professor Bawa. Welcome. We really appreciate your time with us today. And if I may, just one or two other comments. We also completely aligned on your sentiments for the need for differentiation and hybridity within the sector between publics and privates, and that there's a good complementary sort of nature, I think, in what we can build in South Africa within the post-school education and training system. And so we really welcome your sentiments on the need for that kind of differentiation and complementarity. Colleagues, friends, and guests, my thoughts are really going to be very brief and high level. I think Professor Bawa has had an interesting conversation with us, and hopefully we'll probably echo some of the sentiments that have been mentioned already, but I'll go through it very quickly to give you some sense of the ecosystem, if you like, within Regent Business School, what led us to the DBA program, and some of the things that continue to keep us up at night, as it were. And perhaps many of these will be in line with what Prof. Bawa has also already mentioned. For example, my comment here that higher education was already at the crossroads long before the COVID-19 pandemic hit us, and he called it pre-existing, and we completely agree. But I guess what it has done in terms of the health, social, the economic fallout of COVID-19, it has laid bare, or if you like, it has shone a bright light on the deep structural challenges within the global higher education system, not least of which we are part of as well in this part of the African continent. So I think that there's an acute focus now on the various challenges facing post-school education and training, more specifically higher education. And if I may just deal with just two particular issues that we are very familiar with in South Africa, and I think these are by and large universal. The twin challenges of creating access or dealing with unequal access, and the need for deep curricular reform. These are just two of many challenges facing the global and the local higher education systems. In South Africa, we have a participation rate that varies depending on where you get your statistics from, between 12 to 16%. People who participate in a particular age group in higher education. And the OECD equivalent is somewhere around 35 to 40%. So we have a long way to go to absorb more people into the post-school education and training system, and certainly within higher education. And we have to deal with unequal access into higher education. But the second issue on the need for deep curricular reform. In South Africa, oftentimes we decode this, and Prof. Bauer referred to the period 2015 to 2017, when we had the Fees Must Fall campaign and all of the attendant sort of protest action around it. We oftentimes decode curricular reform as decolonizing, and that is a very significant part of curricular reform. But there are clearly a number of other ways in which we would need to understand curricular reform a lot more broadly. And a significant part of that relates to some of the external environmental challenges that Prof. Bauer referred to, with exponential technologies, disruption in the global economy, what we see as a shift to the right in the geopolitics of the so-called Western world, many parts of Europe and certainly in the US, etc., and a whole range of other issues. And of course, the massive disruption, profound disruption in the global labor markets. We've had youth unemployment in South Africa at a horrendous 50% pre-COVID. God forbid that number is far worse in a post-COVID environment. So we have to really deal with the fact that 1 out of 2 young people is not going to get a job in the formal economy, and possibly not in the informal economy, and have possibly given up hope of being employable. So the issues of how to get curricular to be reformed so that they become employability focused is one of the many other ways in which we could decode the need for curricular reform. If I were to sort of go beyond just curricular reform, there are some guests and colleagues and friends that may argue that it's not just about curricular reform, but that higher education itself needs to be reconceptualized. I recall Professor Bauer, a journalist from the UK, doing an interview with me about a year ago, and he quoted a well-known academic in the UK who said that he believes that all universities should be bulldozed and that the world will be a better place. And he asked me to respond to that statement. And so I think that there are some deep fundamental questions that plays inside of higher education and certainly outside are asking about impact and relevance and the other things that we had sort of baked into our philosophy behind the DBA. And certainly the disruptions in the labor market, the impact of disruptive and exponential technologies, etc. All of this points to tough questions that we need to be asking and answering as players within higher education. But I must tell you that I said to the journalist, Professor Bauer and colleagues, that I'm far more hopeful than he would like me to be, because I think there's enough steam in the system and there's enough agility in the system. And the deep traditions and the best part of the deep traditions of higher education and the phenomenal human capital that is within the global higher education system, and the fact that we now have access to these exponential technologies. In fact, I share your view, Professor Bauer, that it's a positive moment. Higher education actually has one of the best possible chances of becoming meaningfully responsive and relevant to rapidly changing conditions, and to see graduates and curricula in a future-focused way. So I'll avoid all of the jargon and the cliche around being future fit and future proof, etc. But I really believe that given the resources we have, human, financial, informational, technological, etc., I really think it's an interesting moment. It's an inflection point that's a positive one largely for higher education to refashion itself in ensuring that it is relevant and responsive to the changing circumstances we find in local and global environments. But of course, there has to be a reconciliation to my earlier point that there has to be a fundamental review. And we've got to ask each other tough questions about our approaches to teaching and learning, and to reviewing well-accepted research imperatives, and to thinking about curricular reform in a way that actually becomes truly transformative. I'll share with you another interview question that this particular journalist asked me, Professor Bauer, and he said, do you sleep well on graduation night after you've capped all your graduates? And it was one that I had to agree with him that I don't sleep very well. We don't sleep very well on graduation night. Thinking about whether we've given our graduates sufficient skills so that they are relevant and that these skills are transferable in a future that is not just changing fast, but that cannot be easily defined and that remains very complex and fluid. So I think that we've got some tough questions again on employability and the curricular relevance issues that we would need to deal with before we really deploy all of the resources at our disposal to ensure that we remain relevant and responsive. I'll take, if you allow me, Dr. Blom, just 20 or 30 seconds to share with you a well-known documentary that is being shown on cable TV or DSTV, if you like, about astronauts' toughest job in the world. It's a very interesting series, and perhaps Professor Bauer would resonate with him a little more. And how do you train an astronaut, given all of the environmental issues on Earth, and for them to survive and thrive in an environment that is completely different in virtually every way in space? How do you teach them to respond for any and every eventuality when you can't really define that eventuality or that set of circumstances? And so how many transferable skills should astronauts be taught so that they're able to survive the race to space and back in a safe and sound way? In many respects, I guess that's a loose proxy, if you like, of how we need to think about graduate attributes. How do we train them for a future that we can't define in any substantive way? And how do we ensure that their skills are transferable enough given the rapidly changing external environment that graduates would find themselves in? So as I begin to sort of wind up my brief input, today officially, ladies and gentlemen and participants on this program, is, as Dr. Blom and Professor Sidat has mentioned, is the launch of Regent's DBA program. We're really pleased. It's, as you can imagine, it is the pinnacle for any institution of higher learning to be able to offer a qualification at the highest level of the NQF, and in this case, a professional doctorate degree. So it's a big day for us at Regent Business School. It's a big day for our alumni, for current students in our postgraduate programs, and we're really glad that you have joined us in this webinar to share it with us. But perhaps I'd like to just mention, beyond the vexing questions and some of the thinking behind the DBA and how we plan to, Professor Bauer, think about the DBA and students who may enroll on the DBA, that they would ask themselves the kinds of questions that you and I have been attempting to ask in this short presentation, large, complex, conceptual issues, like what is the future that humanity needs? And how do we drive social change? How do we drive innovation? How do we ensure that nobody is left behind, whether it's the fourth industrial revolution with all its attendant disruptions and subsequent revolutions? How do we ensure that no one is left behind, that people possess the skills and resources in order to thrive in this kind of rapidly changing environment? In South Africa, we have our own standards that we have set for the kinds of PhD throughputs we're looking for, and the National Development Plan, as many of you may be aware, in South Africa has given us the challenge. When I last checked around 2015, 2016, we had roughly 30 PhD graduates per million. I'm not sure where we are today in 2020, but the NDP had asked for about 100 per million PhD, DBA graduates. So we've got a long way to go in order to increase doctoral output from the higher education system, public and private. And so what is our role in shaping this desired future for humanity? And how do we challenge ourselves with regard to our paradigms around growth, value creation, and how do we do this in a way that does not impact society adversely or the planet and the limited resources that we have access to? And perhaps to close, ladies and gentlemen, this brief message from ourselves at Regent Business School, the one way that we are symbolizing, if you like, the launch of the DBA, Professor Bauer and colleagues, is we're launching a manifesto, a document that attempts to ask a number of questions that the DBA, its students and graduates, the supervisors, the faculty at Regent, and the partners that you rightly point out, Professor Bauer, we need lots of deep-seated partnerships with a very wide range of communities of practice, of publics, as you call it, etc., to make sure that this program remains relevant and cutting edge. But how do we respond to the changes we see in the wider society around us, given all of the disruptions that we had talked about in some length in this discussion? And what this manifesto intends to do really is not to be predictive of the future in any way, but rather point to some of the complexities, the interrelationships, the unpredictability of things that we're experiencing in our external environment. And Professor Bauer has also covered this in the opening of his discussion with us. So it really is very tentative. It's provisional. It's not intended to be exhaustive in any way. It's an interesting document that attempts to ask challenging questions and in some cases attempts to answer it. But really what we're trying to do in this manifesto that is connected to our launch, Professor Bauer and guests, is try to get the DBA to be rooted, to be grounded in a set of challenging questions that we'd like our students and graduates to ask of themselves as they think about their research in the context of their DBA, or for that matter, in other postgraduate programs that we offer. And how can we make sure that the system of higher education embraces a more fluid or a more contingent world? How do we create a more permeable and transformative set of relationships within our communities and beyond to wider society? And in many respects, that symbolizes the way we're launching our DBA today by launching a manifesto that attempts to point to some sort of a rough roadmap that we intend to undertake as an institution so that we're able to best serve our students, stakeholders, and society at large. And I really would recommend participants in this program to get a copy post this webinar and engage with us. And I guess that would be also in line with the advice that Prof. Bauer has given about engaging a wide range of people as we think about a DBA and how it could best be responsive and relevant to the circumstances we find ourselves in. Perhaps I'll close with just this slide. As many of you may be aware, we belong to a network of private institutions across the African continent known as Honoris United Universities. And through the network of Honoris United Universities, we have just under 50,000 students spread across the continent, North, South, East, and West Africa. And what we're trying to do is give practical expression to this theme that we've adopted at Regent and at Honoris, a theme of education for impact. And this has been one of the drivers or one of the items in the rationale behind the DBA. How do we use imagination, creativity, and critical thinking as the new lens through which we reframe the core activities at Regent and more widely within our network in terms of the curricula, the pedagogy, the technologies that we use, and the various disciplines that we teach and engage? And how do we build reflective practitioners using this theme of education for impact so that they're able to shape the world around them with wisdom and skill and build a society that we would like our future generations to live in. So that in many respects is really an executive summary of the manifesto that we're releasing today with the launch of the DBA. And I want to thank all of you for participating and joining us for this launch, and in particular, thank Professor Bauer. And if I could just sort of close by reiterating the advice that you've given, and we've taken careful note of it, Professor Bauer, the need for deep-seated partnerships with various role players, dealing with the theory-praxis nexus and dealing with that in a meaningful way, dealing with contextualization in as creative a way as possible, and lastly, ensuring what you called integration rather than dealing with just reductionism, and finding a way to build a bridge between science and humanities and many other areas of learning, and if need be, to fight what you called anti-intellectualism or something around that theme, and to deal with the anti-science movement that we've seen even in very developed economies. And you rightly pointed to the outgoing president of the US and how his administration has struggled to deal with science. But thank you very much, Professor Bauer, for the advice. We've certainly taken note of it, and we'll incorporate that into our thought processes around the DBA. I'll hand back to Dr. Blom to coordinate the rest of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sheikh. If you would unshare your screen. Thank you very much. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I think that was an excellent exposition of what we intend to do going forward. And I certainly am, as the academic dean, incredibly excited to be a part of this process and to be at the outset, to the initiation, if you like, of a very exciting degree. And of course, it will emerge and it will morph and it will change and so on. But if we keep in mind the kind of broad maxi, I don't know how to say it, maxims, maxims that have been pronounced this morning, then I think we're on the right path. So thank you very much. I think we have about 5 minutes for a bit of an interaction. Prof. Sidat, are there any critical questions that have been raised to the panelists that we could perhaps ask them to address?
Thanks, Dr. Blom. No, there aren't any specific questions. Most of the questions have been relating to people wanting to register and asking about the fees, etc. But there is one, Mate Malusi wants to know about the multidisciplinary approach. And perhaps one of our panelists can, or Dr. Sheikh or yourself can take that one.
Yeah. Yes. I think that's a really good, I did see that. I think that's a really good suggestion. Prof. Bauer, do you want to maybe venture an opinion about that? Because I think that can be quite controversial.
You know, I think that the history of our higher education, not just in South Africa but globally,
yes,
really shaped by changes that were made, in the 19th century, which really led us down the path of this kind of high specialization, if you like.
Yes.
Into.
Yeah.
Prior to that, by the way, higher education wasn't like that. It was much more integrated and so on. Now, clearly, the route to kind of reductionism has been hugely successful. I mean, it has given us aeroplanes and many other things, But what we also know, and we understand very clearly, is that is that the world doesn't divide itself up into disciplines. So the moment you kind of decide that you're going to design a program which is going to address the grand challenges facing society, whatever they might be, then almost immediately you're forced to take a multidisciplinary approach, because the world is not a reductionist world. Like, the world is an integrated world.
Yes.
So it doesn't quite matter, which branch of knowledge you're working in. It seems to me that there has to be an approach which takes us towards kind of integration across the disciplines and so on. So, we've got, again, I mean, we must be careful not to be caught with all the jargon, like,
Yes.
unidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, transdisciplinary, and so on. But rather to start speaking about integration, it seems to me, that would seem to me to be the approach to take.
Yeah, sensible. Thank you. Dr. Shaikh?
Thanks. If I could just make two brief comments. I think that our graduates and many participants on this particular webinar will know that the world of work also is not about silos and operating in silos. And oftentimes one gets a rude awakening when one enters the world of work and finds that you have to suddenly sit with a wide range of people and collaborate across, organizational boundaries and disciplinary boundaries, etc. So I think that is a 21st century skill where a graduate must be comfortable and competent, if you like, in this kind of collaboration that is multidisciplinary. But secondly, also, I think that sometimes we make some errors and we overly specialize portfolios in the world of work. For example, with recent thoughts around, ESG compliance, and many graduates who work in the finance field will know the concept of triple bottom line, and now there are new KPIs for corporates around the world on enterprise issues and sustainability development issues. So people are asking, do we need ESG graduates? People specializing in ESG. But I don't think we need ESG graduates. For that matter, we may not need ethics officers. I think we need the engineer in an engineering firm to think about ESG as she or he deals with their daily work. And we need an accountant who works in whatever sector of the economy to think about ethics and ESG as he or she works through their daily routine of accounting and finance. So I think, again, this calls for this integration in one's skill set so that beyond your technical area of expertise, one is able to deal with a wide range of issues that an organization, public or private, for-profit or non-profit, is dealing with on a daily basis.
Thanks, Dr. Shaikh. I think that is exactly what we're trying to find. So you're never only an accountant. You're an accountant surrounded by either your business or the company that you work for, or the individual that you work for, and so on. So there's always a context, and context matters, Prof. Bawa. Context matters hugely. So thank you very much. Our time has run out. Prof. Sidat, unless there's anything absolutely urgent, I'm going to thank our guests and our speakers, and we can move on. Maybe just to repeat the email address that you've put into the chat for people if they want any further information.
Thank you, Dr. Blom. There is one last question for Professor Bawa. And it comes from a colleague of ours who's asking about the integration in terms of the existing disparity between private and public institutions.
That
was bound to come, Prof.
So, yeah, well, I don't know about the disparities, but I think the key question really is just how do we move towards creating kind of a single higher education institution, a single higher education system, instead of having these kind of fragmented blocks, and at USAF, at least at Universities SA, we have a kind of standing decision at our board now, which is the board is made up of the 26 vice chancellors and myself, that we should explore with the South African private higher education and other bodies, how we can begin to work together, if you like, even think about down the line, a single institution, maybe with different chapters in it or something like that. So we've been meeting quite regularly with SAFE, the South African private higher education, to try and work out, just where are the areas of engagement that we can work on together? Now clearly there's, there are very big differences between the two sectors. I mean, so we understand that, but there are also huge areas of overlap, if you like. So we are working on that now, and hopefully in the next year or so, we should have a working relationship between the private higher education institutions and the public ones.
You know my views about that, Prof. So I'm very, very, very pleased to hear that. Thank you very much. All right, then. If there's nothing else, then I would like to just take the opportunity to thank both our panelists this morning for a very engaging and interesting conversation. And really, the moment, as both of you have indicated, is now to take the step forward and to actually go and find that future that we all are striving towards. So thank you very much for your contribution, and hopefully we will be able to engage with you again in future, not only on these issues, but also on other mutually important issues to us. So thank you very much, Prof. Bawa, Dr. Sheikh, to both of you. And to all the guests who have joined us this morning, thank you very much. Prof. Sidat, I hand back to you.
Thank you, Dr. Blom. Just to conclude then, remind that all queries can be addressed to the email address dba@regent.ac.za. And those questions that have come up, we will endeavor to respond to them as well to the individuals. Thank you very much once again, and goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Cheers. Bye-bye.